first time I noticed something was wrong was the day my mother's kitchen table turned into a battlefield of envelopes. Ivory cardstock lay scattered like fallen soldiers, each embossed with golden vines curling toward the words "You are cordially invited." The air smelled of brewed coffee and polished wood, the familiar comforts of home, but beneath it all hummed the faint electricity of wedding season. My sister Claire, the bride-to-be, sat at the head of the table, a queen in her court of place cards. She was all pearls and precision, hair pinned with cruel exactness, smile stretched taut as if hosting a private joke. I reached for an envelope with my name, expecting the thrill of holding something as simple, as sacred, as an invitation to her big day. But my hand met only blank cardstock. My name wasn't there, not on the neat piles, not in the spare stack, not anywhere. "Looking for yours?" Claire asked without lifting her gaze. Her voice carried that syrupy sweetness that always hid a sting. "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." She slid one envelope into her handbag with practiced casualness, as though it were a receipt and not the key to belonging. A silence dropped heavy over the room. My mother busied herself with a teacup that didn't need stirring. My father's cough filled the space where his protest should have been. I felt my pulse drum against my collarbone. In that moment, I wasn't a grown woman but a child again, watching Claire perform her rituals of exclusion with an audience too timid to interfere. Later, alone in my car, I replayed her words. "I'll take care of it." The phrase sounded less like reassurance and more like a verdict. I could almost see her striking my name from a list, trimming the guest count as though I were disposable. My sister had always been skilled at erasure. When we were children, she erased me from group photos by leaning just far enough forward to block my face. In high school, she erased me from conversations by finishing my sentences with a sharper wit. Now, on the cusp of her wedding, she was erasing me from her ceremony itself. I should have confronted her. I should have demanded my envelope. But shame is a stubborn glue. It stuck my tongue to the roof of my mouth, cemented my hands to the steering wheel. Instead, I drove home through streets that blurred beneath watery eyes, wondering if absence would be easier than humiliation. That night, I opened my closet and stared at dresses that might never see the light of the aisle. Sequins caught the dim glow of the lamp like tiny mocking stars. I told myself it was only paper, only ink, only an invitation. But in truth, it was proof. Proof that to my sister, I was not worth a seat, not worth a witness, not worth being part of her story. And yet, I could not shake the feeling that this was not the end of mine. For days I lived in a half-state, suspended between hope and humiliation. Every time the mail arrived, I stood at the window like a sentinel, scanning the envelopes for my name. Bills, catalogs, a stray coupon booklet, but never the invitation. Each disappointment carried the sharp edge of confirmation. Claire hadn't forgotten. She had chosen. My parents said little, which was worse than saying nothing at all. My mother fussed about floral arrangements, her words fluttering nervously like moths against a lamp. My father busied himself with his garden, hands sunk deep in soil as though burying the shame of his silence. They didn't ask if I had received my invitation, and I didn't ask why. To speak the truth aloud would make it real. At night, when the house was quiet, I found myself replaying old rivalries, ghosts summoned in the mirror of memory. Claire had always been the golden one, homecoming queen, straight-A student, the daughter who never seemed to stumble. I was the shadow orbiting her brilliance, the artsy one with messy notebooks and mismatched shoes, tolerated but never showcased. Our childhood photos told the story clearly. Claire centered, radiant in the frame. Me, slightly off to the side, as though I had wandered into the shot by accident. But weddings are supposed to heal old wounds, aren't they? That's what I told myself when I first heard of her engagement. For a fragile moment, I even believed her joy might soften the sharp edges between us. I imagined us standing side by side, sisters in satin, trading smiles across the altar like two women who had grown out of rivalry and into kinship. That fantasy shattered with the sight of her tucking my invitation away like contraband. The cruelty wasn't only in the exclusion, it was in the secrecy. To erase me openly would have been bold, even brutal. but to erase me quietly, so that I might one day realize the absence too late, left me teetering in a purgatory of doubt. What if she had mailed it separately? What if it had gotten lost? The mind clings to improbable hope when the truth feels unbearable. I tried distracting myself with work, with errands, with late-night movies whose dialogue blurred into static. But everything returned to that missing envelope. It wasn't just about attending a wedding. It was about belonging to a family that had always placed me on the edge of the frame. Claire wasn't only denying me a seat at her wedding. She was denying me a seat in her life. And yet, despite the ache, I couldn't quite surrender. Somewhere beneath the shame, a stubborn ember glowed. Maybe it was pride. Maybe defiance. Maybe the sheer refusal to let my absence be the story she told about me. So I made a decision, small, reckless, and entirely mine. I would go looking for proof. Proof that my name had been struck from the list. Proof that the erasure was deliberate. Proof that, this time, the ghost of me would not vanish quietly. It happened by accident, as most devastating truths often do. I had driven to my parents' house on a restless impulse, telling myself I would help my mother finalize seating charts or lend a hand with the endless ribbons and lace. In truth, I was searching, clinging to the chance that my fears were nothing more than paranoia. If I could find just one envelope with my name, I would breathe again. The dining room table was buried under towers of stationery. Place cards lined up like soldiers, menus embossed in silver script, and the glossy program drafts that smelled faintly of ink. My mother, flustered and distracted, excused herself to answer the phone, leaving me in the quiet hum of wedding preparations. That's when I saw it. A neat stack of addressed envelopes sat at the edge of the table, bound with a lavender ribbon. My eyes traced the familiar loops and flourishes of Claire's handwriting, each name carefully penned. Friends, cousins, distant relatives, even neighbors. I tugged the ribbon loose, my hands trembling, and flipped through them one by one. And then my breath snagged. There it was. Ms. Narrator's name. My name, written in elegant script, nestled between two cousins I hadn't seen in years. The envelope was sealed, pristine, its edge unbroken. Except, it wasn't in the mail pile. It wasn't stamped. It wasn't sent. My knees nearly buckled. The room seemed to tilt, the chandelier above me swaying though I knew it hadn't moved. The invitation existed. Claire had written it, but she had kept it back, hidden it deliberately, as if my presence was an option she could snuff out like a candle. The betrayal hit harder than silence ever had. She hadn't forgotten me. She had erased me by choice, a meticulous erasure, precise as a surgeon's cut. The worst part was realizing that somewhere, in her mind, she believed she was justified. I slipped the envelope into my bag, my heartbeat drumming loud enough to drown the ticking clock on the wall. When my mother returned, she found me calmly folding menus, as though nothing had cracked open beneath my skin. I couldn't tell her, not yet, because this wasn't just about a wedding invite. It was about the story my sister had tried to write without me in it. On the drive home, rain began to fall, streaking the windshield in blurred silver lines. I thought of childhood again. Birthday cakes split in uneven slices, dresses passed down with stains only I noticed, Claire's laughter filling rooms while mine dissolved into wallpaper. But this moment was different. For the first time, I wasn't just the forgotten sister. I was the silenced one, and I had proof of her hand over my mouth. Something inside me shifted then. Not rage, not sorrow, but a fierce clarity. She could hide my invitation, but she couldn't hide me. If she wanted me absent, she would have to confront me face to face. And in that rain-slicked car, I made my choice. I was going to the wedding. The morning of the wedding arrived draped in nerves. I woke before dawn, the invitation still resting on my nightstand like a secret weapon. The embossed lettering gleamed faintly in the weak light, taunting me with its duality. Both proof of my belonging and evidence of my exclusion. For hours I wrestled with doubt. Would showing up make me a villain in my own sister's love story? Would my presence stain her perfect day with whispered scandal? Or was the real betrayal allowing myself to remain invisible, validating her decision to erase me? By the time the sun pushed through the curtains, my choice was made. I ironed a simple navy dress, the kind of dress that spoke dignity, not spectacle. No sequins, no firework of color. I wanted no one to say I had stolen the spotlight. I wanted only to stand in the light at all. The church loomed like a cathedral out of memory, tall and solemn, its bells tolling with an authority that rattled my chest. Guests spilled out in silks and suits, laughter drifting on the crisp air. I stepped onto the cobblestones, each stride heavy with the awareness that I was trespassing on ground my sister had tried to bar. Inside, the pews were already filling, a soft hum of chatter swelling beneath the vaulted ceilings. Faces turned as I slipped into the aisle, some with warm surprise, others with subtle flickers of confusion. My aunt's hand flew to her mouth. A cousin blinked as if seeing a ghost. Word traveled in murmurs that coiled through the room. She came. She's here. I felt it before I saw her. Claire. She stood at the altar, a vision in lace and ivory, her veil a soft cascade that framed her carefully curated perfection. Our eyes locked across the expanse, and for one suspended moment, the hum of the crowd vanished. Her expression wasn't shock. It was fury, sharp and bright, like a blade catching light. But then something unexpected happened. From the side aisle, a figure broke away from the groomsmen. Daniel, the groom. His smile faltered when he saw me, his brows knitting in confusion. He glanced between Claire and me, and a flicker of recognition crossed his face, like someone piecing together a puzzle he hadn't realized was missing. He walked toward me. The church seemed to hold its breath. Claire's lips parted, perhaps to protest, but no sound emerged. Daniel reached me, his hand extended, not cold or hesitant, but steady, as though this moment were inevitable. "Shall we?" he asked softly, the question carrying a weight that pressed against every pair of watching eyes. Gasps rippled through the pews. My throat tightened, words stranded somewhere between disbelief and defiance. For years I had been the shadow in family portraits, the margin note in someone else's story. Now the groom himself was offering me his arm, inviting me to step into the very center of the frame my sister had tried to erase me from. I placed my hand on his arm. The room erupted into whispers. Claire's veil trembled as her fists curled at her sides. The aisle stretched before me, long and bright. For the first time in my life, every step would belong entirely to me. The church doors shut behind me with a hollow echo, sealing me inside the moment I could no longer undo. Every head was turned, every breath drawn sharp. My heels struck the stone floor in deliberate rhythm, the sound magnified under the cavernous ceiling. Each step carried me closer to the altar, and closer to the collision I had both feared and longed for. Daniel's arm was warm, steady, a quiet anchor as the storm brewed around us. He didn't speak, but I felt his pulse in sync with mine, a tacit recognition that what we were doing was no ordinary gesture. This was defiance dressed in ceremony. Claire's face was a mask of bridal serenity, but her eyes betrayed her wild, fractured, burning with the humiliation of being unmasked before the world. The white lace trembled over her shoulders, not from nerves but from rage barely contained. "Stop!" she hissed as we reached the midpoint of the aisle, the words slipping past clenched teeth, audible only to those nearest. But the music carried on, the organ swelling like a tide, drowning her command in grandeur. I should have faltered then. I should have melted into the background as I always had, apologized with my absence. But instead, I straightened my shoulders, matching Daniel's stride, the navy of my dress a sharp contrast against the river of white blossoms flanking the pews. For once, I wasn't a shadow. I was unignorable. We reached the altar. Daniel released my arm, but not before giving it a subtle squeeze, a gesture that said, "I see you, even if she doesn't." My throat ached, the weight of years pressing there, but I forced myself to lift my gaze. Claire finally broke. "This isn't your place," she spat, voice cutting through the reverent hush. Gasps scattered through the congregation like startled birds. The officiant froze mid-page. My mother buried her face in her hands, my father staring as if the roof itself might collapse. But no one moved to pull me away. Not one guest dared. I turned to my sister then, not with fury, not with triumph, but with the raw ache of a lifetime. "It was never about your wedding," I said softly, my voice trembling but clear enough to reach her. "It was about being seen. For once." Her lips quivered, ready to unleash another tirade, but something in my words stilled her. For a fleeting second, behind the veil of pride and anger, I caught a flicker of recognition, maybe even guilt. The silence was unbearable. The organist's hands hovered above the keys, waiting for a cue that never came. Guests leaned forward, caught in the gravity of the moment, unsure if they were witnessing a ruin or a rebirth. I stepped back then, breaking the spell. "This is your day, Claire," I said, "and I won't steal it. But I won't be erased either." With that, I turned, walking away from the altar. My steps were steady, the aisle stretching infinitely in reverse. This time, though, I wasn't retreating into shadow. I was carrying my own light with me. Behind me, the church held its breath. Ahead, the open doors poured sunlight across the floor, waiting like a promise. The sunlight outside the church was blinding, as if the world itself had conspired to wash me clean. The cool air rushed against my skin, sharp and liberating. Behind me, the muffled echo of the organ resumed, dutifully dragging the ceremony back into order. Life would continue in there, as though nothing had happened. Claire in her gown, Daniel by her side, the congregation reshaping the memory to fit a neater story. But I knew better. Some moments cannot be buried, no matter how many layers of lace and ritual are draped over them. I walked slowly down the stone steps, the navy fabric of my dress whispering around my legs, each breath of wind carrying away the weight I'd carried for years. For the first time, I wasn't crying for what I lacked. I wasn't shrinking against the frame of someone else's portrait. I had stood in the aisle, the place she had tried to bar me from, and spoken my truth where it could not be ignored. At the bottom of the steps, I stopped. My parents stood just beyond the church doors, torn between duty and love, their eyes darting nervously back to where the ceremony pressed on without me. My mother reached out, her fingers brushing mine, trembling with unspoken apology. My father said nothing, but his gaze, soft, tired, heavy, met mine as though to acknowledge what they had both failed to shield me from. "It's all right," I whispered, though it wasn't. "Go. Be with her." They hesitated, then turned, pulled back toward the orbit of Claire's world. That too I released. Some ties are too knotted to undo in a single day. I lingered in the sunlight, letting the sound of bells and laughter spill faintly through the doors. People would ask questions. Rumors would twist the story into shapes unrecognizable. Some would call me cruel, others brave. But the truth, my truth, was simpler. I had taken back a place in my own life. A car slowed near the curb. Daniel's best man leaned out, offering a confused nod, as though unsure if he'd just witnessed history or disaster. I waved him on. I needed no rescuer. Not anymore. Later, when the photographs were framed and the cake forgotten, they would remember this day differently. Claire in white, radiant with anger and grace. Daniel steady yet torn. And me, the sister who had once been written out of the story but had written herself back in. As I walked away, the church bells tolled again, not as celebration but as reminder, that life is not about the places you are invited to. It is about the moments you claim, even when no one saves you a seat. I did not wait for reconciliation, nor did I crave revenge. What I carried from that aisle was something far rarer, the certainty that I no longer needed my sister's permission to exist. And in that certainty there was peace. Our 10.